A lot to dive into. I thought Josh Paunil over at PhillyMag.com always does a great job, but last night, looking at Carson Wentz, he was really the story last night. I mean, when you have a game where your starting team plays 3 plays, it's hard to really get more of an evaluation on those guys, so you're looking to the next thing, which is the fact that you have the number 2 overall pick in the draft. And, Josh, you wrote extensively about his night over at Birds 24/7 Philly Mag, how he fared in his first attempt. I would give you my opinion like this. I thought he didn't look rattled. He didn't look like the moment was too big for him. I don't know that he played great, but he certainly flashed the ability that people hope he has. So you could say there's something to build off of from that very first time that he walked onto the field.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that assessment. I think that there was more good than bad that you can take away from that game if you're Carson Wentz. I mean, especially a lot of the mistakes that he made were things that you would expect from a rookie in his first NFL game, especially a preseason game. You know, early on, the high throws, the ball sailed on him a bit. He didn't really develop a rhythm early on. But, you know, again, those are all things that you would expect. But he showed flashes of talent that just not everybody has. The first thing that stood out to me was just his mobility and how well he can throw on the run. And one problem that some guys, some quarterbacks who are athletic and have a lot of success running the ball in college, they'll often just get out of the pocket and try to run the ball. But one thing that impressed me with Wentz was he would escape the pocket, but he would still keep his eyes downfield, try to see what he could take. But then he wouldn't force anything. If nothing was there, he'd either throw it out of bounds or pick up 6 or 7 yards. So that was the first thing, was the mobility, escaping the pocket. But then I also thought he just had some, incremental progress in game. There was a couple plays early on. I think it was in the third quarter. I'm not sure if he didn't see a corner blitz coming or if he just got the ball out too late. But there was one play with a corner blitz. He got hit as he was throwing the ball, and the ball was an incomplete pass. And then later on, Wentz saw the quarterback blitz coming as soon as the ball was snapped, got the ball out of his hands quickly for an easy 8-yard gain. It's not, going to show up on his highlight tape. It's not, a play that just screams out at you. But it's just small decisions like those that kind of show signs of hope for him, and that you can see just the incremental progress, although obviously still have a long, long way to go.
He does, and it's just his first game. And were you surprised at how he came in when he did and handled the 2-minute drill the way that he did?
Yeah, and that was actually one thing I was very interested in getting the assessment from his teammates after the game about how he handled the huddle and how he was kind of on the sidelines and not just, after the ball was snapped. Because it's one thing to be in command, in these training camp practices, but to be in a game setting, even though it is a preseason, and all of his teammates, it was unanimous how impressed they were. Kenyon Barner even went so far to say, I think he's going to have a very, very good future in this league, because his teammates were very impressed by the command of the huddle, the leadership, of how he could control things. And so that was definitely one thing that impressed his teammates, was how he was not just after the snap, but before the snap.
Josh Paunil is with us, PhillyMag.com, Birds 24/7. And he obviously showed a guy that on the move, when he's out of the pocket and doing things, he's going to be able to create. Even at this, young of an existence in his professional career, he looks like a guy that if, he had to get on the move and throw the football in a game situation, he looks like he's, pretty well versed at that. It's the standing in the pocket stuff that he's got a lot of work to do, right?
Oh, definitely. And that's what Doug Peterson and, Steve Filippo, the quarterback's coach, and Frank Reich, the offensive coordinator, that's what they're really focused on, is kind of the lower body mechanics, his feet, keeping them tighter to the ground, making sure his base is where it needs to be, because those are things that will really go into how accurate he can be, and so he doesn't take up too much space in the pocket. So those are things that he's working on. I think that those mechanical issues that they're working on is part of the reason he had a little bit of inaccuracy yesterday. Again, I think early on a lot of it was just maybe excitement and juice playing in your first game. But those mechanics are definitely what he's working on going forward. And that's going to be a good lens to look through to determine how well Carson Wentz is progressing, not just now, but toward the end of the season, if we see him in a regular season game, and of course through the rest of the preseason, but how his footwork is, and how that has a direct effect on his accuracy.
Josh, you mentioned the excitement and juice. And I would assume that he had a lot of excitement and juice, but that's one thing that impresses me about him is how he kind of downplays, like, look, it's just football. I'm not, like, nervous. It's just a game. He seems like he has this pretty cool attitude towards the game is not too big. He doesn't take it too seriously, but yet he loves playing.
Yeah, and that's the one thing that I guess it was a couple of months ago now. It was around the draft time, and I was talking to Carson Wentz's high school coach. And even when he was in high school, he's always been the same way. He's always been even-keeled. He never gets too high. He never gets too low. He's always in control of his emotions. He doesn't let things really affect him too much. And so that just seems to be in his DNA. That's who he is. It's not something that he needs to work on or he needs to improve. He's already has that kind of mindset and attitude that you'd want as a potential franchise quarterback and a guy that you hope is the leader of your team for years to come.
Josh Paunil's with us, PhillyMag.com, Birds 24/7. I do want to get your take on Chase Daniel. Are we supposed to say that this guy he looked terrible at times last night? I think a lot of that had to do with the offensive line, but even when he had some opportunities, you didn't see, a strong arm, which you didn't expect, but he was wild in some of those throws, and you wonder if that's just because of the pressure he was getting. But, do you watch last night's game? And we can't overreact. We know that. But do you watch last night's game and say, look, if Sam Bradford were to go down, how did they go to this guy over the rookie?
Yeah, and at first, it really was just the offensive line gave Chase Daniel no chance. But even when he had the few opportunities he did to throw the ball, his arm strength just is not there. And, maybe later in the preseason or during the regular season, the timing of the offense will improve. Hopefully the offensive line play will improve. But his arm won't get that much stronger. And so that's the big issue with him, is his ability to make all these different throws. If he can do it on a rope. And, only Doug Peterson and the coaching staff will know when Carson Wentz, they can put him in a game and his head just won't be completely spinning. But I imagine that there will be a point this season where Carson Wentz deserves to be the number 2 quarterback over Chase Daniel. If the goal is to win games, as it obviously is, then I would expect at some point for Carson to deserve to be the number 2 quarterback. Now, maybe we're months away from that, that's at the very end of the season, but I would be surprised, just based off the very limited knowledge of what we have now, if Carson Wentz can overtake that spot at some point.
Do you think that's fluid or set in stone, that Daniel's number 2 no matter what?
It's definitely set in stone right now. Perhaps when we get to the second half of the season, it could become a little bit more fluid. But I would be very surprised if Carson Wentz is active on game day, especially in the first half of the season. Maybe when you get into the final few games, now obviously it depends how the season plays out, where they are in the division standings, and where they are injury-wise. But I would definitely expect Chase Daniel to be the number 2 quarterback and for Carson to be inactive for most of the game.
Let's get your take on some other things. Josh, you watch a lot of, obviously, camp and then last night. So when you at camp, we hear a lot about guys, and then you see them in action last night. Let's start with Jalen Mills. The coaches have kind of gone out of their way to say, look, we want to see him when the lights go on. And we not only want to see him, we want to see him against better competition. We just don't want him out there against the threes. We want to see him against the better guys. How would you grade him last night? Did he pass his test?
Yeah, well, Jalen Mills, he's a guy that he really earned all the praise that he got from his coaches and his teammates in the spring, and then also in the summer before Pats came on. But during training camp, the buzz has died down just a little bit because of the adjustment he's going through. And I think the game last night really just reflected the fact that he is a rookie. He has a long ways to go. And even though it's understandable that a little bit of the hype that he's got, but there were plays where, on defense, missed tackle on special teams when on the punt return he let the gunner get inside of him, which is a big no-no. You want to try to force them not just outside of you, but out of bounds. And then just things, coverage with the penalty that he had. And he did have one play particularly that really impressed me. I think it was a slot receiver was running like a post route or some type of intermediate route over the middle, and Jalen Mills basically ran the route for the receiver. He broke inside before the receiver did, and he told me after the game it's just because of the film study he did and because he just recognized what was coming at him. So obviously that gives you hope. But I think he's one of those guys where the game gave him a lot that he can take away from and a lot to learn from. But it also just reminds you that you don't want to rely on this guy too much early on. Part of the thing that hurt his draft stock was just he doesn't have great speed. His 40 time at the combine was like 4.61, which is not very good for a cornerback. And so it wasn't really surprising on one play early in the second quarter when he got beat deep. But those are the things that you would expect his technique will help him with, and especially staying in the slot. I still think he'll be a good contributor for the Eagles in the slot. We'll give you some good snaps there. But it's also a reminder to kind of temper your expectations for Jalen Mills.
We're talking with Josh Paunil from PhillyMag.com, covers the Eagles. Give me your assessment of, with Malcolm Jenkins out, how did the guys fighting for that backup spot take advantage of the evening?
Good question. Jalen Watkins, he still can't tackle very well, but he can definitely cover. And that's one reason why I think he's a very strong candidate to make the 53-man roster as a backup safety. And the nice thing about Jalen Watkins is it's not just his coverage as a safety, but obviously he has the corner background. So we even saw it last night where he dropped down into the slot a couple of times to cover the slot receiver. So he's a guy that, because of his versatility, he can cover not just a safety, but also a corner, not just nickel corner. He can cover, if he has to, on the outside as well. Now, again, the tackling, especially in this defense, the safeties have more inside run fits because of how Jim Schwartz just lets his D-line get after it, and then the linebackers, and then behind the linebackers, the safeties just basically read off of the levels in front of them. So you obviously want the tackling to improve, but he had at least 2 pass breakups by my count last night, and Jalen Watkins is a backup safety who really showed something.
Couple other things, Sayamala, with the uncertainty at right tackle with Lane Johnson, which I do want to get into more here in just a bit, because I thought there were some interesting things from Peterson on that last night. But when this first came down, my knee-jerk initial reaction would be Wisniewski, Sayamala battle at left, Barbary bounce out to right tackle. Did Isaac Sayamala or Stefan Wisniewski do anything last night to make you feel like that would be a better possibility? Or were they so bad that they might have to rethink doing that?
Well, that's an interesting question, because to me, Stefan Wisniewski really separated himself early on in camp. With Brandon Brooks missing, 7 training camp practices with his injury, I thought Wisniewski was actually really took advantage of that opportunity and did well, even against, in one-on-one situations against Fletcher Cox. And so I thought he was kind of the clear front runner to be the alternative to Alan Barber at left guard. But he didn't look that good last night. But one thing to keep in mind that is helpful for Sayamala and Wisniewski is when the Eagles' second-team offense was in, they had a lot of snaps against the Buccaneers' first-team defense. But still, Wisniewski, there was one play where he was pulling around the right side, and there was a linebacker that just shot up and got a tackle for loss. In situations like those, it looked like Wisniewski had a missed assignment, but maybe it was someone else on the offensive line. On another play, when Sayamala, him and the center, I think it was Josh Andrews at the time, I want to say, they were on a double team against the defensive tackle, and they gave up a sack. And in the middle of the block, Sayamala just turns around and runs in the opposite direction. And I think that was really reflective of the fact that of all the time that he missed because of the graduation rule, he wasn't here for OTAs, he wasn't here for minicamp, and he really missed out on weeks and weeks of work and just rest. I mean, even though he can have the playbook and he can study that back at home, to not be at the NovaCare complex, and for the graduation rule to prevent him to have that time with his teammates, I think that really showed the effect that it's having on him. And it's tough because the Eagles drafted him, with the idea that he would really compete and push Barber at that starting left guard position. But it's really tough for a guy when he just, because of these, asinine rules, that he can't be with his teammates. I thought that was one thing that really hurt Sayamalo, was just all that time that he missed, and it showed last night.
Josh, I want to get your take on Lane Johnson because it seemed like once whoever asked the first Lane Johnson question opened the floodgates. It was like, as soon as someone asks one, I'm getting in there. How'd you think Peterson handled it last night? It seemed like a guy to me who was almost caught off guard that he got asked the questions and then almost didn't know what to do once they kept coming in.
Yeah, well, I was actually surprised that Doug Peterson said as much as he did with Lane Johnson. I mean, perhaps it's just because I'm so used to Chip Kelly, but I was expecting Doug to just say, I don't have any comment on that, or, we'll wait and see how it develops. But he answered several questions about it, and the whole time he was talking about, he kept saying, if it's upheld, which, he didn't explicitly say it, but when you keep saying if it is upheld, it sounds like you're expecting the suspension to come down any time now, which obviously, we're expecting a suspension to come, but, the last that we heard, at least from Lane Johnson, was that they were waiting on that sample B test. So I was surprised that Doug Peterson talked as much as he did about Lane Johnson. He really seemed to be conveying the notion that, they're already starting to plan how they would do things without him, to basically rotate guys in with the first team offense at right tackle, whether that's Alan Barber or Dennis Kelly, who's currently the number 2 right tackle on the depth chart. So it does sound like they're planning for life without Lane.
Yeah, and he mentioned the interesting one. Number one, he said he hasn't talked to Lane. Are you surprised by that?
Yeah, and that's one thing that he's kind of set up this process. I mean, with all the stuff that happened with Nelson Aguilar this summer, he said the same thing. And, again, I've only covered one head coach of Chip Kelly. Maybe it's more widespread than I would think, but I was surprised that, you hear this report about your star tackle who you just gave, $60 million and $35.5 million guaranteed, about him potentially missing 10 games because of a second failed drug test, and talk to him. I mean, I don't know. I mean, that was strange to me. Perhaps Doug just wants to keep those conversations private, so he's just saying that. But I did think that was weird that he said he hasn't even talked to Lane Johnson about this.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is possible because my thought for last night's game was, look, if I'm the Eagles, I must go to Lane Johnson and sit him down and ask him point blank, like, look, should we be prepared? Like, give him a chance to either lie or tell the truth to find out whether you can trust this guy. Because obviously, if he gets nailed again, there's going to be some trust issues, because the third time he's basically done. But almost sit him down and say, Lane, should we expect that you're going to be gone? And if he says, you know what, guys, yes, you don't play him. You play somebody else and start moving on. And if he says no, and then he turns out that he lies to you, you know right there that you can't trust this guy. So I thought the Eagles could have had a situation last night where they could have dug deeper into this, and they just kind of chose to allow this to flap in the wind.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if Lane Johnson does, is suspended for 10 games, as reports suggest, and there will be significant trust issues. I mean, for this to happen not once but twice, I mean, think about it. Lane Johnson has played 3 NFL seasons. He's played 3 NFL seasons, and if these reports hold true, he'll be suspended for a second time. So it's not like he's even been in the league for that long. I mean, it's not like the first suspension was so long ago. The last suspension was 2 years ago. So it's not like Lane just forgot. And especially after the first time Lane talked about, how big of a mistake it was, how much he regretted it, and how he should have gone to the Eagles training staff and approved it with them. And so if it turns out that for a second time he didn't go to the Eagles training staff and try to get approval of what this was, then I think that should give you significant doubts about whether you can trust this guy and his decision-making process, because if he made this, I mean, that's the biggest thing, is making the same mistake twice. I think that's really where you start to not trust guys. I don't want to say anyone can do something wrong or get caught one time, but if you're making the same mistake multiple times, that really casts doubt on your judgment.
Let's be clear, though. These are not steroids. The first time was Adderall, correct? And now this time is some bizarre peptide situation.
It was reportedly Adderall, but you can't, the NFL can't come out and say that what it was.
Okay.
So there's a report out there that it was Adderall. But my thing is, if you take something that you don't get approved by your team training staff, or you don't get it approved by the NFL, then you shouldn't be taking it. And obviously it's easy for me to say, but especially after you get caught one time, you just sign a $60 million contract, $35.5 million guaranteed. These are the things that should be basic in terms of getting approval to make sure you don't get caught, or that you don't do something you shouldn't be doing, especially after you already get punished for it one time.
What do they do? What's the best? What is your RX for this? What's your remedy?
Well, before last night's game, I thought the best remedy would be to move Alan Barber from left guard to right tackle and plug in Wisniewski at left guard. But now, I mean, I'm not sure what we'll get out of Wisniewski. I mean, he has a ton of NFL experience. He has a lot of starts in this league, although obviously that experience comes from playing center, but still he's a lot of playing experience along the offensive line. And so that's what I thought would be the best remedy. But now, who knows what Stefan Wisniewski is going to give you. Perhaps Dennis Kelly, who's currently the backup right tackle, maybe you just plug him in, keep Alan Barber at left guard if you feel more comfortable with him there. But it's really going to depend on what does Dennis Kelly show you at right tackle, and what does Stefan Wisniewski show you at left guard? Because I think they would feel fine with Alan Barber either at left guard or right tackle. I think what it comes down to is Dennis Kelly and Wisniewski at those opposite positions.
Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. Josh Paunil has more on last night's game and moving forward over at Birds 24/7 at PhillyMag.com. As the Eagles win their opener, they'll move on to Pittsburgh next. Thank you, Josh. Always appreciate it, pal.
Thanks for having me, Mike.